The rain fell in sheets across Sector 9's commercial district, turning the elevated walkways into rivers of reflected neon. Marcus Webb stood under the narrow overhang of Brennan's all-night cafe, watching the water cascade off the edge of the platform 3 stories above the street level. His shift had ended 2 hours ago, but he'd stopped for coffee and lost track of time staring at nothing in particular. That's when he saw her dot at first. She was just a shape huddled against the locked doors of the Integration Center across the plaza. Small, motionless, and completely soaked. Marcus squinted through the rain, his coffee growing cold in his hand. The center had closed at sunset. He knew because he passed it every day on his way to the warehouse. They never left anyone outside. He set his cup on the nearest table and stepped into the rain. The water hit him immediately, cold and relentless, soaking through his work jacket before he crossed half the plaza. He kept his eyes on the shape by the doors. As he got closer, details emerged. Thin arms wrapped around drawn-up knees. Silver hair plastered to a small head. Skin that gleamed pale blue even in the dim light. A Keltharon child. Alone. "Hey," Marcus called out, his voice barely carrying over the rain. "You okay?" The girl's head lifted slightly. Her eyes caught the light from the center security panel, silver, wide, and utterly exhausted. She didn't answer, just watched him approach with the wariness of something that had learned not to expect kindness. Marcus crouched a few feet away, keeping his posture open and non-threatening. Water ran down his face, dripping from his nose and chin. "Building's closed," he said, stating the obvious because he didn't know what else to say. "You waiting for someone?" She shook her head once, a tiny movement. "How long have you been out here?" She looked away toward the empty plaza. "Since they locked the door." Her voice was small but clear, with the slight melodic quality common to Keltharon speech. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He glanced at the center's dark windows, then back at the girl. "They just left you out here?" "My application was denied." She said it matter-of-factly, like she was reporting the weather. "Insufficient cultural integration scores. They said I should try the satellite facility, but the transit stopped running an hour ago." Marcus stood slowly, processing this. The satellite facility was 40 kilometers outside the city. She had no way to get there, and even if she did, it would probably just deny her too. The system was designed to help displaced children from the treaty zones find homes, but in practice, it mostly found reasons to say no. He made a decision without really thinking about it. "Come on," he said, extending his hand. "You can't stay here." She looked at his hand like it might disappear. "Where?" "My place. Just for tonight. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. You don't know me." "No," Marcus agreed. "But I know you can't stay in the rain." She studied his face for a long moment, silver eyes searching for something sincerity, maybe, or the absence of threat. Whatever she found must have been enough, because she slowly unwrapped her arms from around her legs and placed her small, cold hand in his dot. Her skin felt like ice. Marcus pulled her gently to her feet. She stood maybe 4.5 feet tall, painfully thin in a soaked gray tunic that had probably fit her better a few months ago. A small bag hung from her shoulder, the strap cutting into her neck from the weight of wet fabric. "What's your name?" he asked as they started walking. "Neva. I'm Marcus." He kept her hand in his, worried she might slip on the wet walkway. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning." He felt that twist in his chest again, sharper this time. "Okay, we'll fix that first." The rain followed them all the way to the transit station. Marcus swiped his pass for both of them, and they took the elevator down to the residential line platform. The car that arrived was nearly empty, just a tired-looking woman in a medical uniform and a young couple absorbed in each other. Neva sat pressed against the window, leaving a gap between herself and Marcus. He didn't push. She watched the city blur past, towers and walkways and lights smeared into abstract patterns by the water on the glass. "Have you been to Sector 12 before?" Marcus asked. She shook her head. "It's quiet. Mostly residential. Nothing fancy, but the buildings are solid and the neighbors mind their own business." "Do you live alone?" The question caught him off guard. "Yeah, have for about 3 years now." "Why?" Marcus considered how to answer that. Because his ex-wife had left when he'd given up piloting. Because the apartment felt too big for 2 and too small for 3. Because he'd gotten used to the silence. "Just worked out that way," he said instead. Neva absorbed this and looked down at her hands. They were still trembling slightly, though whether from cold or fear or exhaustion, Marcus couldn't tell. The transit chimed their stop. Marcus stood and waited while Neva gathered her bag. She moved carefully, like someone used to being told she was in the way. They exited onto a covered platform and walked 3 blocks through the residential district's enclosed corridors. Marcus's building was 14 stories of prefab housing units, identical to 50 other buildings in the sector. He lived on the 9th floor. The elevator hummed quietly as it carried them up. His apartment was exactly what he'd described: clean, small, and sparse. A kitchen area along one wall, a couch facing a modest screen, a table with 2 chairs that he'd never needed both of. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. Windows overlooking the sector's central green space. Currently dark and rain-soaked. Neva stood just inside the door, dripping onto the mat, not moving further until invited. "Bathroom's there," Marcus pointed. "There's towels in the cabinet. I'll find you something dry to wear and get some food started." She nodded and moved toward the bathroom, like she was walking through someone else's dream, expecting to wake up outside again at any moment. Marcus heard the door close softly. He stood in his kitchen, rain still dripping from his jacket onto the floor, and wondered what exactly he'd just done. He'd brought home a refugee child he'd found in the rain. No plan, no clearance, no idea what morning would bring. He should call someone. Social services. The integration center. Someone official. Instead, he opened his refrigerator and started pulling out food. The shower ran for a long time. When Neva finally emerged, she wore one of his old shirts like a dress, her silver hair hanging damp and clean past her shoulders. Her blue skin had lost some of its grayish pallor, though she still looked exhausted. Marcus had set the table with 2 plates, protein portions, roasted vegetables, bread still warm from the heater. Neva stared at it. "Sit," he said, keeping his tone gentle. "Eat slow if your stomach's empty." She sat. She picked up the fork. She took 1 bite, then another, and Marcus saw the exact moment hunger overrode caution. She ate steadily, methodically, like someone who'd learned not to waste food. He ate his own meal and didn't watch her too obviously. When she finally set down her fork, the plate was clean. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome." Marcus stood and collected the dishes. "You can have the bed. I'll take the couch. I can sleep on the couch. The bed's more comfortable, and you've had a worse day than me." Not negotiable. Something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe, at being told something was for her benefit, without conditions attached. She followed him to the bedroom and stopped at the doorway while he pulled the blanket straight and set an extra pillow at the head. "If you need anything, I'm right outside," he said. "Bathroom's open all night. Kitchen too, if you get hungry." Neva clutched her small bag to her chest. "What happens tomorrow?" It was the question Marcus had been avoiding. "Tomorrow we figure things out, together. But tonight you sleep somewhere warm and dry. Deal?" She looked at the bed, then at him, then back at the bed. "Okay, double quotes." Marcus left her alone and closed the door most of the way, leaving it cracked so she wouldn't feel trapped. He changed into dry clothes and made up the couch with a spare blanket. The apartment felt different with someone else in it fuller. Somehow, despite how small Neva was, he lay awake for a while, listening to the rain against the windows and the quiet sounds of a child settling into an unfamiliar space. He'd have to call someone tomorrow, start the process of making this legal, or at least official. The thought exhausted him. But tonight, at least, she was safe and fed and dry. It would have to be enough. Marcus woke to the smell of something burning. He jerked upright on the couch, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar sound of movement in his kitchen. Then he remembered. Neva, the rain, the girl he'd brought home, without thinking through any of the consequences. He found her standing on a chair in front of the stove, poking uncertainly at a pan with a spatula. Smoke curled up from whatever was in it. She turned when she heard him, silver eyes wide with something between determination and panic. "I was trying to make breakfast," she said quickly. "I thought I wanted to help. But I don't know how your heating element works, and it's okay." Marcus crossed to the stove and turned off the burner. The protein slices in the pan had transformed into blackened discs. "Nobody's upset? Come on down from there." Neva climbed down carefully, her feet still bare, finding purchase on the chair seat and then the floor. She wore the same oversized shirt from last night, her silver hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. In the morning light filtering through the windows, her blue skin had a subtle iridescence to it, like oil on water. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wasted food." "You didn't waste anything. You tried something new." Marcus opened the window to let the smoke out. "When's the last time you used a kitchen?" She thought about it. Never. The shelters had meal distribution. Before that, double quotes, she trailed off, and Marcus didn't push. Right, so first time cooking. That's actually pretty brave. He pulled out a fresh pan and a carton of eggs. "Want to learn?" The surprise on her face made his chest ache. They spent the next 20 minutes making breakfast together. Marcus showed her how to crack eggs without getting shell in the bowl, how to know when the pan was hot enough, how to flip without splattering. Neva watched everything with intense concentration, like she was memorizing instructions for defusing a bomb. When they finally sat down to eat, the eggs were only slightly overcooked, and Neva looked at her plate with something that might have been pride. "These are good," she said after her first bite. "You did most of the work." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Neva set down her fork and looked at him directly. "What happens now? You said we'd figure it out today." Marcus had been dreading this conversation. He'd already checked his messages that morning, nothing from the integration center, which meant they either hadn't noticed Neva was missing or didn't care. Both options made him angry in a way he hadn't felt in years. "I need to make some calls," he said carefully. "Talk to some people who know the system better than I do. See what options we have." "Options for what?" "For making this ... He gestured between them, searching for the right word. "Official, legal, so you can stay here if you want to." Neva's hands tightened around her fork. "If I want to?" "Yeah, I'm not making decisions for you, Neva. You get a say in what happens next." She stared at him like he'd spoken in another language. "People don't usually ask what I want." "Well, I'm asking." She was quiet for a long moment, silver eyes studying his face. Then so softly he almost missed it. "I want to stay." Something settled in Marcus's chest, a decision that had been hovering finally landing. "Okay, then we make that happen." The first call went to Jenna Voss, Marcus's neighbor from 3 doors down. She was a retired social advocate who'd spent 40 years navigating the refugee integration system. If anyone knew how to cut through bureaucratic nonsense, it was Jenna. She arrived within an hour, a tall woman with gray-streaked hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Neva, who had retreated to the corner of the couch, making herself small, and her expression softened. "Hello, sweetheart," Yenna said, her voice warm but not syrupy. "I'm Yenna. Marcus called me because I'm very good at arguing with people who work in tall buildings. Is it all right if I sit?" Neva nodded hesitantly. Yenna settled into the chair across from the couch, moving slowly, keeping her body language open. "Marcus tells me the Integration Center denied your application. Do you know why?" "Cultural integration scores," Neva said, repeating what she'd told Marcus. "They said I didn't know enough about human customs." Yenna's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And did anyone teach you these customs before testing you on them?" Neva shook her head. "Of course not." Yenna pulled a tablet from her bag. "Tell me everything you remember about the evaluation. Every question they asked, every form they had you fill out. Over the next hour." Yenna extracted Neva's entire history with the integration system, 3 different facilities in 18 months. Each one finding a different reason to transfer her instead of placing her. Not enough documentation. Wrong age bracket. Insufficient cultural preparation. The bureaucratic runaround designed to make problems disappear by moving them somewhere else. Marcus listened from the kitchen, his anger building with each new detail. He'd known the system was broken, but hearing it laid out so starkly made it real in a way that statistics never had. "All right," Yenna said finally, setting down her tablet. "Here's what's going to happen. Marcus can file for emergency guardianship based on abandonment and immediate need. With your cooperation, Neva, we can expedite the process. It won't be instant, probably 3 to 4 weeks, but in the meantime, you can stay here under temporary placement." "What if they say no?" Neva asked. "Then I make their lives very difficult until they say yes." Yenna's smile was sharp. "I'm quite good at it." The next 2 weeks developed a rhythm. Marcus adjusted his work schedule to early shifts, so he'd be home by mid-afternoon. Yenna checked in daily, sometimes bringing food, sometimes just sitting with Neva while Marcus ran errands. The paperwork crawled forward with agonizing slowness. Niva changed in small increments. She stopped asking permission to eat food from the kitchen. She claimed a corner of the couch as her own, piling it with the few possessions she'd brought and the small treasures. Marcus started bringing home a book about Keltheron history, a soft blanket in deep blue, a plant for the windowsill that she could tend. But she still flinched at sudden movements, still watched the door like she expected someone to come through it and take her away, still woke in the middle of the night, and Marcus would hear her moving quietly through the apartment, checking that everything was still there, that she was still there. On the 15th day, Marcus came home to find Neva standing in the kitchen with Yenna, both of them laughing. Actual laughter, bright and surprised, because Neva had just successfully flipped a pancake, and it had landed perfectly in the pan. She turned when she heard him come in, and her smile didn't immediately disappear. "Look, I did it." "I see that." Marcus set down his bag. Something warm went furling in his chest. "Looks perfect. Yenna's been teaching me." Neva gestured with the spatula. "She says I'm a natural." "She's a better student than you were," Yenna said to Marcus, her eyes twinkling. "She actually listens to instructions." They ate pancakes together at the small table, and for the first time since Neva had arrived, the apartment felt less like a temporary arrangement and more like something that might last. That night, after Yenna had gone home and the dishes were cleaned, Neva lingered in the living room instead of retreating to the bedroom. Marcus was reviewing work schedules on his tablet, but he looked up when she sat on the other end of the couch. "Can I ask you something?" She said, "Always. Why did you stop flying?" The question surprised him. He'd mentioned his old job once in passing, days ago. He didn't realize she'd remembered. What makes you think I stopped? Yenna told me you used to pilot cargo ships between stations. She said you were really good at it. Marcus set down his tablet. I was okay at it. But you stopped. He was quiet for a moment, considering how much to share. But she'd given him pieces of her story. It seemed fair to offer pieces of his. I got tired of being gone. My marriage was falling apart, and I thought if I took a ground job, stayed in one place, maybe we could fix it. He shrugged. We couldn't. But by then I'd given up the thing I was actually good at. Neva processed this, her silver eyes thoughtful. Do you miss it? Sometimes. The flying, anyway. The rest of it, the long hauls, the isolation, not so much. Do you regret it? Marcus looked at her, this small, brave person who'd been thrown away by a system that should have protected her, who was trying so hard to believe that maybe this time things would be different. No, he said honestly. I don't regret it. She smiled then, small but genuine, and returned to her corner of the couch. They sat in comfortable silence, and Marcus realized that for the first time in 3 years, his apartment didn't feel too big or too small. It felt exactly right that the guardianship approval came through on a Tuesday morning. Marcus was at work when Yenna called, and he had to step into the warehouse's empty break room to take it. It's official, Yenna said, and he could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Full guardianship, pending a review in 6 months. But that's just protocol. She's yours, Marcus. You're hers. Marcus sat down heavily on the break room's worn couch. That's it? They just approved it? Well, there was some strongly worded communication from my end about their abysmal handling of her case, and perhaps a few mentions of potential media interest in stories about abandoned children. But yes, it's done. When Marcus got home that afternoon, Neva was at the kitchen table with Yenna, working through a language exercise. She looked up when he came in, and something in his expression made her set down her stylus. What's wrong? She asked immediately. Nothing's wrong. Marcus pulled out the chair across from her and sat. The guardianship was approved. Officially, you can stay. Neva went very still. Stay? Like, permanently? If you want to, yes. She looked at Yenna, as if checking whether this was real. Yenna nodded, her eyes suspiciously bright. Neva turned back to Marcus. I can stay, she repeated, testing the words. You can stay. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, Marcus thought he'd said something wrong. Then she was crying, huge gasping sobs that shook her whole body. Marcus moved around the table and pulled her into his arms, and she clung to him, like he was the only solid thing in a world that had been shifting under her feet for too long. You're okay, he murmured. It's okay. You're home. Home, she choked out between sobs. I have a home. Yeah, kid. You do. Yenna quietly excused herself, closing the door softly behind her. Marcus held Neva while she cried out months, maybe years of fear and exhaustion and uncertainty. He didn't tell her to stop or calm down. He just held on and let her feel everything she'd been holding back. When the tears finally subsided, she pulled back slightly, wiping at her face with her sleeve. Sorry, I got your shirt wet. Don't care. Marcus pushed her silver hair back from her forehead. You okay? She nodded, then shook her head and laughed a watery, fragile sound. I don't know. I think so. That's fair. She looked around the apartment, at the couch with her corner piled with belongings, at the plant thriving on the windowsill, at the kitchen where she'd learned to cook, at all the small markers of a life being built. This is really my home now, really and truly. Neva took a shaky breath and straightened her shoulders. Then I should probably clean my corner of the couch. It's kind of a mess. Marcus laughed, surprised and delighted. Yeah, okay. But maybe after dinner. I'm starving. I could make something, she offered, her voice tentative but hopeful. How about we make something together? Her smile was like sunrise slow, and all at once, bright enough to fill the room. Together, she agreed. I'd like that. They made dinner side by side in the small kitchen, and when they sat down to eat, Neva didn't sit across from Marcus. She sat next to him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, and when she was finished, she didn't immediately stand to clear the dishes. She just sat there, in her home, with her family of two, and let herself be still.